Now, you are convinced your fiance's 8-month-old daughter, Camilla, was fathered by her ex-boyfriend. Agree there is indeed a possibility that another man fathered your child, but say you're hoping it's not true.
My ex-girlfriend brought her over there. First time I seen her, I fell in love, I'm not gonna lie. A few months went by and me and my girlfriend broke up. Just so happened her and her boyfriend broke up. She invited me to some party, happened to never get back with her boyfriend, so we started to talk in a relationship-wise. For a few weeks, we ended up having sex. We sort of fell off after the 2 weeks. She ended up going back with her ex. I say about a year ago, we ended up talking again. Midway through March, we considered dating this one day. And she's like, hey, I'm gonna go look for some apartments. You should come with. She calls me up on the phone and like, hey, I'm pregnant. I was at my brother's house. I can't talk like this right now, I'm a little drunk. I hung up the phone, talked to my brother. I wasn't expecting her to say it. We just started talking for 2 weeks, and just like that, it was just like, boom, I'm pregnant.
All right, so Ms. Quintera, you agree with the account of your relationship?
Not completely.
You don't?
No.
This description centers on the emotional, legal, and moral weight of a paternity dispute unfolding under the measured authority of Judge Lauren Lake, where DNA testing is not just biology. It is identity, financial consequence, and the fragile relationship between law and justice. The courtroom atmosphere is defined by confession, heartbreak, and an evolving understanding of how truth functions when evidence, suspicion, and memory collide. Judge Lauren Lake presides with calm resolve, laying the foundation for why DNA testing remains one of the most pivotal legal tools in modern family courts. The litigants appear not merely as adversaries, but as individuals carrying years of emotional history, broken trust, and the burden of knowing that a single result might rewrite their future. The judge's tone reflects more than judicial duty. It reflects a defender of fairness, a voice that bridges the legal realm and the human heart. In this account, the father appears with undeniable anxiety. He worries not only about paternity, but about whether he has been misled, used, or manipulated. He brings forth his doubts with phrases shaped by his community, his history with the child's mother, and the whispering gossip that exists outside the courtroom. The mother enters with equal conviction, balancing fear, hope, and resentment towards a legal system that demands proof, even when her heart believes it unnecessary. She highlights that she never intended to create a legal battlefield, but here they stand, confronting the possibility that biology may fracture what love built. As arguments unfold, Judge Lauren Lake anchors the process in legal clarity, DNA testing, chain of custody documentation, and the critical notion that truth changes everything whether people welcome it or resist it. She explains that paternity cases are not simply about biological fatherhood, but about the moral responsibility embedded in raising a child. She acknowledges the intersecting worlds of the Game-Changing Attorney podcast, Truth Changes Everything podcast, the Divorce Course podcast, and the numerous cultural conversations where law meets human testimony and regret. The father admits he has long feared the DNA results. Some people regret taking this test, he confesses, not because they fear lies, but because they fear truth. The courtroom becomes a space where private insecurities are transformed into legal fact. Judge Lauren Lake reminds all present that this is not just an emotional ordeal, but a legal mechanism intended to protect children, stop financial manipulation, and clarify parental obligations. Keywords naturally surface within the judge's guidance. The concept of justice in jurisprudence, the technical application of adverse inference in evidence act when one parent refuses testing, and how modern courts handle subtle or overt cheating allegations. The mother clarifies that there was no intention to deceive, only a complicated relationship arc involving brief reconciliation with her ex, emotional vulnerability, and financial difficulty. The father counters with his experience of humiliation, rumor, and the pressure of public perception. In Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom, adoption stories, full episodes, and child support Supreme Court references are not distant academic examples but active legal parallels. She outlines that if a man signs a birth certificate and later learns he is not the biological father, The law cannot always undo emotional fatherhood, nor does it always absolve financial duty. That is why certainty, legally and morally, must precede responsibility. The mother describes the father's role during pregnancy, his presence at medical visits, his participation at the hospital, his signature on the certificate, and his coverage of child care expenses. This strengthens her claim that he cannot dismiss the child simply because doubt has resurfaced. The father, however, frames his involvement differently, insisting his participation should never be interpreted as confirmation of paternity, but rather as compassion offered in uncertainty. Judge Lauren Lake listens with unwavering neutrality, reminding both that the relationship between law and justice demands not emotional assumption but verifiable evidence. Notably, Celebrate Recovery testimonies enter the dialogue, invoked by the father when he describes the shame and anxiety that led him to emotional withdrawal. He has struggled publicly and privately. He mentions those personal testaments to reflect that truth, while painful, can also restore identity, heal a child's belonging, and correct misunderstood narratives. The judge acknowledges that family court is not just about DNA. It is also about recovery, forgiveness, and reintegration. In explaining her judicial philosophy, Judge Lauren Lake elevates the distinction between legal proof and moral accountability. Justice must not be weaponized. DNA cannot become a punishment, nor can parenting be used as leverage in romantic disputes. She frames the case within the traditions of jurisprudence, citing how evidence stage in divorce case proceedings are often entangled with allegations of infidelity, financial dependency, and social pressure. The mother insists she never exploited the situation for financial gain, referencing how she was unemployed and grateful for his support. The father does not refute this outright, but adds that financial contribution cannot substitute for certainty. Judge Lauren Lake supports this by noting that paternity rights and obligations must originate from verified biological bonds or court-recognized fatherhood, not circumstantial kindness. Both parents reflect on how the Divorce Course podcast and the Game-Changing Attorney podcast have opened public dialogue about legal transparency, emotional honesty, and evidence-based parenting disputes. They mention how countless couples confront DNA tests not just for legal clarity, but because they fear the emotional collapse that might follow. The judge reinforces that hesitation is human, but withholding truth from a child is neither lawful nor ethical. As testimonies continue, the courtroom arrives at a universal understanding. Paternity cases are not solely about discovering a father. They are about restoring a child's right to identity, medical history, emotional belonging, and legal support. Judge Lauren Lake highlights how cheating stories often attempt to define paternity disputes, but the law does not govern guilt or forgiveness. It governs proof. She reminds them that family jurisdiction is built to protect children from adult conflict, not to arbitrate romantic history. A child deserves certainty without having to wait for her parents, emotional stability, or relationship clarity. The DNA envelope is introduced with solemn calm. The judge reiterates that whatever the result, responsibility must be honored. If confirmed, the father must embrace legal and emotional duty. If disproven, the mother must accept accountability for years of assumption. The courtroom watches as legal identity is about to be declared, where biology no longer remains abstract but becomes written truth. The judge concludes this stage of description by acknowledging that paternity results do not simply solve disputes, they redirect futures. If the father is confirmed, financial support moves from voluntary goodwill to statutory obligation. If disproven, the court considers whether reimbursement or emotional restitution is required. The weight of justice rests not in punishment but in truth. The courtroom does not breathe, at least not in the ordinary sense. With Judge Lauren Lake presiding, reality is no longer personal memory or romantic recollection. It is testimonial truth shaped by legal vocabulary, emotional vulnerability, and a judge who understands the thin but immovable line between law and justice. This next arc of the description explores the weight of DNA certainty and its collision with love, money, loyalty, and the deeply human fear that truth may dismantle the identity someone has lived with for years. The father remains seated, but the posture is different from before. His doubt has not vanished, yet it has shifted from suspicion to anticipation. He is torn between his past choices, signing the birth certificate, paying child-related expenses, standing beside the mother through pregnancy, and his present demand for legal clarity. His internal narrative is influenced by years of watching cheating stories unravel in other lives, through whispered community gossip, online commentary, and legal breakdowns sectioned and analyzed on the Divorce Course podcast and the Game-Changing Attorney podcast. He admits that he fears judgment, not from the bench but from the world that lingers beyond the courtroom doors. Judge Lauren Lake speaks in terms rooted in jurisprudence, invoking the concept of justice in jurisprudence as she clarifies that no court can force love, but every court must enforce accountability. She explains calmly that DNA results do not determine whether a man is kind or devoted. They determine whether he is legally, biologically, and financially bound. The court cannot erase emotional history, but it can define legal responsibility. The mother shifts from defensiveness to raw honesty. She describes the psychological toll of carrying a child without certainty from the father, especially while recovering from surgery, financial instability, and whispers from those who questioned her past. She says she never intended harm, nor did she foresee that love would be tested through scientific proof. She speaks of people regret taking DNA tests, not because they fear the child, but because they fear losing the identity they built around fatherhood, partnership, and hope. Judge Lauren Lake acknowledges that in her courtroom, countless families have stood in almost identical shapes, divided by miscommunication, misaligned timelines, outside opinions, and assumptions born in between relationships. She references that in modern legal development, DNA testing has transformed paternity courtrooms, rendering the old-era testimonies of resemblance and rumor obsolete. Truth has been rebuilt through science. It is why Truth Changes Everything podcast episodes continue to resonate. Truth may not soothe every heart immediately, but it stabilizes legal futures. The discussion shifts toward the broader systems that frame paternity issues: Supreme Court child support precedents, statutory frameworks influenced by adverse inference in Evidence Act applications, and the importance of testing when multiple partners exist within the conception window. Judge Lauren Lake explains how failure to test early can lead not just to confusion, but to civil consequences, emotional debt, and financial obligations that outlive romantic ties. The father admits quietly that aside from doubt, he also fears commitment in the legal sense. Not the emotional version, but the state-enforced version. If the DNA results confirm he is the biological father, he will transition from voluntary caregiver to obligated provider. In that transition, love must coexist with legal command. Judge Lauren Lake reminds him that fatherhood is not punishment. It is identity, duty, and the child's right. The mother speaks again, but this time about belonging. Not hers, not his, but the child's. She explains that a child without clarity grows into an adult with questions that echo across decades. Those who listen to Celebrate Recovery testimonies know these stories. Children who carry silent confusion. Children who resent both parents not because of biology, but because of secrecy and avoidance. The mother confesses fears of her child one day saying, "Why didn't you both make it clear earlier?" Judge Lauren Lake nods, for she has heard thousands of versions of the same sorrow. The courtroom analysis deepens into the structure of relationship between law and justice. Law demands procedure, affidavits, evidence submission, chain of custody, certified results. Justice demands compassion, acknowledgement, ownership. The judge emphasizes that both must work together when deciding paternity. The father reflects aloud that he has spent months watching adoption cases on Adoption Stories full episodes, and he now understands that fatherhood is more than DNA, but that DNA cannot be ignored simply because love existed. He fears that if he is not the father, sharing love for a child he nurtured will feel like theft of emotional identity. If he is the father, the guilt of doubting her will sit heavy. Judge Lauren Lake reassures him that truth is uncomfortable precisely because it matters. The next legal explanation concerns financial restitution. If the test proves he is not the father, reimbursement might be considered. If he is the father, financial support becomes standardized under statutory calculation. Either way, rights and obligations become clear in ways oral promises never can. Judge Lauren Lake lays out the judicial philosophy. Paternity disputes cannot remain unresolved because unresolved identity becomes emotional injury. She references evidence stage in divorce case precedents, explaining how many custody and support disputes stem from unresolved biological questions. Children caught in parental conflict are not simply witnesses, they are the stakes. The parents listen as she clarifies that many paternity litigations are not about who someone loves but who someone was legally responsible to be. The courtroom is not there to judge character, but to determine biology, support, and constitutional parental rights. In this narrative, every phrase becomes evidence of the universal struggle between fear and duty. With heightened honesty, the father admits that his doubts were not solely about fidelity. They were also about timing, emotional abandonment, and the pressures of public scrutiny. He describes that while supporting the mother financially, with diapers, supplies, transport, and medical arrangements, he also endured quiet judgment from his community, some urging him to leave, others insisting biology was irrelevant. The mother responds without anger now. She concedes that she could have avoided this scale of damage by agreeing to immediate DNA testing. She understands why some people regret taking the test, not because results break families, but because results force them into truth they postponed. Judge Lauren Lake reiterates that postponement of truth does not protect children. It only protects adult emotions, and adult emotions cannot outweigh a child's right to legal identity. She uses the moment to educate both parties on how paternity law intersects with child welfare, parental rights, and court-acknowledged obligations. She explains that under jurisprudence, false fatherhood is not harmless. It alters medical access, inheritance, psychological bonding, and statutory dependency. She reinforces that this courtroom is not about moral failing but about legal correction. The father breathes differently now, not relieved, not distressed, simply resigning to the reality that truth will redefine him. He does not fear the envelope anymore. He fears what life will require of him once it is opened. The mother sits in silent emotional fatigue. She has defended herself against insinuations of infidelity and manipulation, but now she understands her mistake rested not in intention but in avoidance. She speaks slowly about love, identity, and motherhood, acknowledging that certainty is not for her but for the child. Judge Lauren Lake finalizes the verbal foundation. DNA results are not emotional verdicts but legal clarifications. They do not determine who loved and who failed. They determine who is legally father and who must legally support. The courtroom prepares to transition from testimony to revelation. In this phase, every keyword previously introduced becomes a living legal thread. Truth is imminent, unavoidable, and transformative. Whether the father leaves with burden or blessing, whether the mother stays with relief or regret, whether the child gains verified identity or must later seek emotional reconciliation, this chamber of law stands firm. The judge concludes this arc with the unwavering authority of family court. Justice may not heal instantly, but it directs the future with clarity. The air in Judge Lauren Lake's courtroom shifts toward inevitability. Voices are calmer now, not because conflict has disappeared, but because truth has become undeniable in its approach. The final stage of this description addresses what happens when legal certainty intersects with human consequence, When DNA is read not as medical data, but as destiny, obligation, emotional vindication, and sometimes emotional rupture. Before delivering the result, Judge Lauren Lake clarifies to both parties that the foundation of family jurisprudence is fairness. She reiterates the lawful balance between law and justice, emphasizing that justice is not the comfort of one parent, but the protection of the child who could not choose her parents, her timeline, her circumstances, or the doubts that have shadowed her infancy. She reminds them that each testimony, each objection, each proof submitted is not merely evidence but architecture for the child's identity. The mother's statement transitions from defensive posture to accountability. She expresses remorse, not for loving, not for conceiving, but for allowing uncertainty to stretch beyond the moment it should have been resolved. She admits that she feared the test not because she feared the outcome, but because she feared the emotional collapse that clarity might demand. She references countless cheating stories used against her in argument and whispers, acknowledging how those narratives shaped perceptions around her motherhood. She explains that when she hears discussions on the Divorce Course podcast, or cases analyzed on the Game-Changing Attorney podcast, she now recognizes that her hesitation was not strategic. It was protective, misguided but protective. The father listens in a silence that no longer carries accusation, only exhaustion. He acknowledges that if the test confirms his biological role, he must apologize, not for seeking truth, but for the emotional distance his doubt created. He concedes that while people regret taking DNA tests due to the emotional shock, he would have regretted never taking one even more deeply. He explains that truth, however painful, allows him to redefine himself in relation to the child, with dignity instead of suspicion. Judge Lauren Lake uses this moment to educate both parents on the unavoidable legal truth. DNA is not merely biological verification. It is the blueprint for lawful financial support, medical access, inheritance rights, educational claims, and psychological grounding. She references Supreme Court child support standards to reinforce that no parent's uncertainty can suspend a child's entitlement to financial stability and parental recognition. The courtroom is reminded that law is not compassionless, but compassion cannot override statutory expectation. The discussion also addresses how adverse inference in evidence act functions in family court. Refusal to test, delay in testing, or attempts to avoid truth can be interpreted legally, not emotionally. The mother acknowledges this with an honest exhale, understanding now that her fear of emotional fallout could have evolved into legal consequence had she refused indefinitely. The judge reflects on the countless testimonies she has heard through her career, stories that resonate deeply with the spirit of Celebrate Recovery testimonies, not because they involve addiction, but because they involve human restoration, forgiveness, and acceptance of painful truth as part of healing. She assures both parents that whatever the result, healing begins when denial ends. The father considers the broader context. He has heard adoption stories, full episodes where biological ties are absent yet love flourishes, and he acknowledges that biological verification does not automatically make parenting easy, but it does make responsibility certain. He states that if he is the biological father, he intends not only to support financially, but to rebuild emotional steadiness, because doubt has already claimed too much of the child's first chapter. The mother shares her internal conflict regarding motherhood and identity. Throughout the pregnancy and infancy, she leaned heavily on the father for emotional and financial partnership. She admits that she interpreted his presence as acceptance of fatherhood, and that legal clarity seemed unnecessary in those moments. But time, argument, outside opinions, and slowed trust changed that. She explains that when DNA becomes the dividing wall in a relationship, fear often chooses silence rather than resolution. Judge Lauren Lake emphasizes, without accusation, that silence is the enemy of family law. Silence prolongs confusion, multiplies emotional cost, and can interfere with the child's psychological foundation. She reiterates that the evidence stage in divorce case proceedings often reveal that parents do not collapse because of results, but because of the months or years they spent avoiding them. This final section addresses the philosophical thread that has been present since the first word. Truth changes everything not because it destroys, but because it refuses to accommodate illusion. In this courtroom, truth is framed not as victory or defeat, but as structural clarity. The judge reminds both parents that once DNA defines legal fatherhood, co-parenting powers and responsibilities must shift from personal interpretation to state-protected guidelines. The father prepares emotionally. He reflects on a future where diagnosis records, medical forms, school documentation, legal guardianship, and financial responsibility all fall under his name if the test confirms it. He realizes fatherhood is not merely love expressed but identity legislated. He mentions that in the Truth Changes Everything podcast, individuals often speak of the shock of reality, but also the relief of finality. He craves that finality now. The mother prepares as well, not with fear but with surrender to the process she postponed. She understands that if the test confirms the father's doubt falsely, she must accept his return not as a favor but as a right. If the test disproves his connection, she must shoulder regret and possibly restitution, but she will do so without bitterness now, because clarity has replaced anxiety. Judge Lauren Lake holds the envelope. She pauses, not for dramatic effect but for legal respect. She explains that DNA testing is not a judgment of morality. It is a method of accuracy. It cannot determine who should love, who should stay, who should forgive. It only determines who is father under the law. She warns both parties, as she has warned many before them, that no result ends responsibility. If he is the father, co-parenting agreements, financial schedules, and emotional consistency are required. If he is not the father, emotional accountability still remains, for time shared, moments bonded, assumptions made. The courtroom's conclusion is deeper than biological revelation. It demonstrates why relationship between law and justice matters in family court. Justice demands the child knows her origin. Law demands the parent knows his obligation. Humanity demands both respect each other after the truth. As the final words of this description solidify, Judge Lauren Lake echoes what years of cases have taught her. Truth is not the villain. Delay is. Avoidance is. Secrecy is. Truth may break denial, but it builds structure. It may shock adults, but it protects children. The DNA results once read do not erase pregnancy memories, hospital nights, shared expenses, or emotional dependency. Instead, they categorize them correctly, within truth. And truth, even when uncomfortable, is the only framework that allows healing to begin without debt of doubt. This is the end of the journey in this descriptive arc. What is left is not sorrow, not triumph, but clarity. Because here, under the steady direction of Judge Lauren Lake, and within the boundaries of family jurisprudence, every parent eventually learns that legality is not the enemy of love, only the enemy of confusion.